Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome all of you here to our information session on joint preserve and designation process for Pine Creek and Ebb and Flow on the Anishinabe Gas property that's located in Dauphin. I've invited Darcy to open us up with a prayer today, so Darcy can come up.
Anishinabe Minegoziibe, Anishinabe Jumamon of Kyung, Kideotinism of Semak Degan, Amia Missing over Jan. Me was getting them up near Yakumanogum, a hoe.
I guess I should have introduced myself. I always assume that everybody knows who I am, but Minegoziibe, I go by Brenda Catchway. I'm the chair of Pine Creek Economic Development. Our next guest on the agenda is we'd like to invite Chief Nipanak to come up and say a few words on this process that we're going through.
Brenda. Bonjour, Anishinabe. I asked for carve out, of course, to bring some political conversation into this business transaction that we agreed to enter into many years ago with our friends down the road to the southeast of us, Evanflow. I recall back in 2008, the land purchase was made. I was elected in, and I had to work quickly and closely with late Chief Ralph Bolio in order to secure the land and keep the mortgage payments up to date. We had trouble at the time with some of our financial issues. Just keeping up with the mortgage payment was difficult for us. But we all, the two communities working together had a vision for development of what this land could be. And we stayed true to that. We had offers for sale on the land, which we did early on because we knew that one day in the future we'd get to a point where something good might come of the work that we committed to. So when I think about this project, I think about late Chief Ralph and his leadership and his vision. And of course that feeds into the leadership work of the Ebb and Flow community. Chief DeJarlo, thank you for being here and being part of the conversation and making sure that we're helping move these milestones towards reserve creation and designation and actually eventually get into business. It's been a pleasure working with Chief and Council at Ebb and Flow to get this project to the point where it is today. My hat's off to the commitment of Brenda Catchway as our chairperson. She keeps the ball moving in the right direction. And of course, those community members who have stepped up in Minegoziibe to be part of our Economic Development Board. Thank you for the dedication and the time. Notably Reg Nipanak, Arthur McKay, Brenda Catchway, Laurie Thompson, Vernon, key players and business thinkers in our community that contribute to keeping us on track and making sure that we're following through on these things. So I believe community participation is a big part of how we can move these projects forward, and I thank them for their continued commitment to the table. Part of getting this across the finish line includes information sessions, and what we've always wanted to be is transparent and accountable to the process, and that means that we have to communicate clearly what our intentions are and how we got to this point. The corporate structures that are somewhat new to us have to be clearly articulated so that people understand how decisions are made today, but possibly more importantly, how decisions are going to be made in business tomorrow. We put structures in place so that future chiefs and councils can't impede the opportunity for good commercial businesses to be established at the site. And that's very important because we've seen in some instances in some communities where a change in chief and council means the end of a good business or a disruption to a good business. But for those political dynamics, those things wouldn't happen. And we're trying to create that structure here so that those things don't happen, so that investors have the confidence to bring their money forward in Dauphin. That's what we're trying to do, and that will benefit our future generations. That's with a view to the future, a vision for the future. And I thank the leadership councils on both sides for committing to that process, because the real beneficiaries are going to be down the road. It's going to be our children's generation, from the jobs and the economic development that spins off from what we collaborate on today. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Nipanak. I'd also like to invite Chief Desjardins to come up. Introductory words.
Amigo, which tabi jung doji, kita no marayan. Hegat kaya zami no sima, misha shwera ini wing ngamonya ka wit no kimang, beji is samak. Ein gut no schneto nish keman is so yaman anen. Ayotuma, awenene jan den no match minijama. Mi wetches kitin in numara yak no. Egeta pejigi chinen da out where we ching kan yisu ching yisu skone gadan apeje no mak apanya mi jo askito mene uma justoin mi wes nenak kete we makka nak shu dangi zok ka yibano kata matwa nogum jebaki singi mehu Minuji wing is Quiniganan Aniji. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wayne Desjardins, Chief of the Evanflow First Nation. I just briefly mentioned that the things or the people that were involved with this process right from the beginning. The late Rolf Bulliu and the councils that were in Pine Creek and Evanflow at that day. So I'd just like to thank them for all the work that they did. I'd like to thank Brenda for all the work that she's done. Very hard to try and get somebody that's going to be dedicated to something like this and to make two communities get together and work for the betterment of our First Nations. I'd like to thank all the people that are here today. I also mentioned, this process has been given to us, put in front of us by the Indigenous Services Canada, and this is the processes that we're going through. It was publicized on social media, and we only have a few members here from each community, but hopefully a lot of them are working right now instead of trying to avoid this. But it's not for the current chief and council of the communities today. It's for the future, the kids that are not born yet. That's the vision we have for our communities. I always tell the people, as a leader, I'm not going to be there forever. I'm lucky to have been here for the last 12, 13 years or whatever it is. But the thing is, you know, all these things that we learned about when we were going to school, the things that we didn't learn also, you know, day school, CFS, residential school, not ever taught in provincial school systems. You know, and unfortunately, it had to come out this way with, you know, the 215 bodies that were found at a residential. So it gives me great pleasure to be standing up here to work with Pine Creek, ISC, and the Council of the Communities. Because we do have a vision, and we have that right people for economic development. So this is just the beginning of what can and will be for the future of Pine Creek and Ebb and Flow. As Pine Creek has also purchased more land in Dauphin, but Ebb and Flow purchased land in Dauphin, I think it was Ochre River Municipality. We own the golf course there. So Chief Nepenak and his council, and same thing with myself and my council, we talked about going into a partnership further we can do after this project is completed. Like I said, there's lots of opportunity for economic development, which will help both communities in the long run. And with that, you know, we started this a few years ago. I'm not sure, it's about 3 years ago, Brenda, 3 or 4?
We filed the application in 2020, so 3 years.
So, but like I said, it's a long process, but we're there. You know, we had the breaking ceremony there in Dauphin. We had a big teepee set up. And we had an elder come in. He helped us with the name of the site and the new gas station. And that's what we have here today, written on the wall. I've been to a jack, you know, it's very significant because it's for the kids, like I said, the ones that are here and the ones that are not here yet. With that, I forgot to mention doing the prayer for us. You know, it's very important always to, you know, the way we grew up, you know, there was the Catholic, and we also, at one point, we almost lost our culture and religion, and I know that's what's happening. Culture and language in our communities is going down. So we need to work on that. Because without our language, we're not going to have too much of a culture. So remember that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is we have a panel up here of Indigenous Services Canada representatives and also a representative of our business development. The next part on our agenda, we're going to be, I guess, at the far end. We're going to be talking about, we'll have him introduce himself and he'll be talking about the addition to reserve process.
Thank you, Brenda. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriel Munoz. I am the analyst from Indigenous Services Canada for the Additions to Reserve team. I'll be talking a little bit about the general ATR process, as well as some major points of what the aspects of this that I've been working with Brenda and with Darcy, and with the legal representative for Flow, as well as the consultant on the file. So I'll start off with a little bit about the general additions to reserve process. This covers the way in which land is added to the reserve base for the use and benefit of the First Nations. Currently, the policy that we're using is the 2016 policy developed during that calendar year. Now, under the 2016 policy for additions to reserve for community additions, under which this proposal falls, there are a few different benchmarks that need to happen before the land can be recommended to the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations for reserve creation. There is the initial BCR or Band Council resolution that selects the land. There's the title search, which is performed internally by Canada just to identify the names of the corporations on the title. In this case, it's jointly owned by the economic Pine Creek and for ebb and flow. There's the environmental site assessment, which I'll touch on a little bit later. There is the survey and boundary certainty aspects, which have been completed. And there is anything under the third-party resolutions phase that needed to be accommodated for Bell MTS as well as Manitoba Hydro. And as this is a joint reserve under the policy, there does need to be a joint reserve referendum held on each First Nation, looking for a simple majority. So people show up and 51 agree or vote yes to the joint reserve referendum, then it will pass. Also under the 2016 policy for joint reserves, there is the need for something called a governance and management agreement. Now, it is an agreement or a document that outlines the way that the joint reserve will be managed. And this covers everything from establishing what is known as the General Council, which I'll talk on in a minute, term limits within that, creation of what's known as the Elder Council, general aspect, delegations of authority, any dispute resolutions, laws and bylaw application, and general provisions, amongst a number of other smaller items. So, that falls under the purview of the governing council, which is made up of each of the chief and councils from each First Nation, so 10 members in total. The general quorum for any decision is a minimum of 6, with a minimum of 3 members from each First Nation, equal representation from both First Nation. There are 2 mechanisms for passing resolutions. The first one is the ordinary council resolution, and that deals with contracts, agreements, commitments, development projects, as well as managing any financial authority and delegated authority. The second method is called the special council resolution, which requires all 10 members of the governing council. And that is related to some of the bigger, more consequential aspects of managing the reserve, as selling, surrender, disposal, or the voluntary exchange of lands. All of these mean unanimity for the decisions being made by the governing council. At some level, there does need to be unanimity, obviously broken down by that of those decisions. Now, laws and bylaws need to be passed by each First Nation prior to their application on the joint reserve, meaning that any law or bylaw passed by an individual First Nation won't be applicable or have any sort of application on the joint reserve itself. The other First Nation also decides to pass that law. Moving on to how everything will be owned. As there are only 2 First Nations that are a party to this joint reserve, there will be an even 50-50 split of the land. The business that will be leasing the land is known as PCEF, Property Management Limited, Pine Creek Ebb and Flow Property Management Limited, and is owned 50-50 by the individual First Nation development corporations. As mentioned earlier, Pine Creek Economic Development, as well as Ebb and Flow Corporation. That same business is the one that will be running and operating the businesses on the leased land. I touched earlier on the dispute resolution model, so I'll go over that a little bit in a bit finer detail here, but still at a bit of a higher level. If there are any disputes that need to be resolved between the two First Nations, the first step, as identified in the Governance and Management Agreement, will be around the informal discussions and negotiations. If that fails, then the process will move to the formal notification and response from each party to the other. That will lead into the mediation from the Elders Council. And if mediation hasn't been achieved within a certain time period, then either party can move to binding arbitration. Now, the governance and management agreement, why it's needed, is to very clearly spell out how things will operate within the, at times, very complicated process of a joint reserve and managing a joint reserve. As it is between two First Nations, or in theory, multiple First Nations, if there is a dispute to happen, the federal government can't get involved. So this document is crucial to outlining how the First Nations will work together to come to a resolution on their own. Now, this process and this model was developed internally by the First Nations, their legal counsel, and some input from the consultant on the file. There were a few minimums described by the 2016 policy that needed to be applied. And those requirements were surrounding the cost implications for creation and management of the joint reserve, the requirements for unanimity for big decisions, as well as an equal and undivided interest nations involved. Another aspect of an economic development reserve, joint reserve in this case, is what's known as the Municipal Development and Services Agreement, which is a document drawn up between the First Nations and the municipality from which they intend to draw services from. Now, the Municipal Development and Services Agreement was drawn up between both First Nations and the City of Dauphin, and it covers the general term of the agreement, general and specific services, provisions, land use and development aspects, as well as access provisions. The MDSA, as they're known, covers services such as water, sewage, snow removal, fire protection, infrastructure services, fees for services provided, and they're all encompassed under this document. Available if you would like. Please let me know. I'm happy to circulate and provide copies of the MDSA as needed, as well as the Governance and Management Agreement. I do have copies of those as well. As initially mentioned under my opening remarks about the general, is the need for an environmental site assessment, which identifies the environmental state of the land and whether or not there has been any uses of the land that would make it unfit for reserve creation or use. Current assessment for this parcel of land is still awaiting some final documents prior to completion, but currently all signs point to the land being free of any contamination. And now I will pass the microphone off to you.
Hi, can you hear me? Is it working? I can't hear myself. My name's Tanya Grove. I am a lands management officer at Indigenous Services Canada, but I am also the official electoral officer for referendum vote. I also have my two deputies, one from Pine Creek and one from Ebumvo here, that are going to assist me during the votes, Darcy and Alicia. So if you have any questions and you don't want to address them to me, they're available. And Ricky unfortunately couldn't come today, but he's also our Pine Creek representative. Before I get started, I just wanted to do a couple of housekeeping things. People will find index cards on their tables. If you are a member who doesn't live on the First Nation, you are still entitled to vote in these. But if you're unable to make the journey out to the First Nation on the voting day yourself, you may vote by mail-in ballot. Also, anyone who is going to be away from home, traveling, working in a hospital, they are also allowed to vote using a mail-in ballot. So if you have your address listed with your representative First Nation, you can fill in an address card and drop it off to me before you leave. I'll be over at this table here till the end of the day, and I will ensure that you get a mail-in ballot. And here, as Gabe said, he talked about some documents, the MDSA and other documents. I'm going to mention several as well, and also several legislations and policies, copies of all of the documents we talk about, and links to where you can find the regulations like the Indians will all be available on the social media sites for both Pine Creek and Ebb and Flow starting tomorrow. As of tomorrow, the documents for this referendum will what we refer to as being officially posted. So they will be posted in the places around the First Nations for people to read them in person. They will also, we begin mailing out mail-in ballot packages for those people who have already provided addresses, and you should start to see them in the mail by the end of next week. Discussing the conditions of both the referendum and the designation documents, I will be moving from general conditions to terms that are specific to the agreement we have in place today. Okay. As previously mentioned, that this process has been very long and very complex, and the lands unit that is in charge of referendums, myself and my colleagues, became involved about 6 months ago, 8 to 6 months ago, and we have been intensively discussing the required designation document and for this designation a lot. It's been long, drawn out, and complex because for the first time, as far as we know, across Canada, we are holding a referendum to ask 2 questions at the same time, same day, and simultaneously for 2 First Nations. Ultimately, we'd have liked to hold these all on the same day, the votes, but we weren't able to because of manpower and time. But we are asking both First Nations to vote on 2 questions. 1, do you agree to have a joint reserve created with your partner? Pine Creek, do you agree to join with Ebb and Flow? Ebb and Flow, do you agree to join with Pine Creek? Yes or no? Should the community members vote? So at the same time, asking a second question. If you agree to join a joint reserve and, with your neighbors, do you agree to allow that reserve to be designated for leasing purposes? The leasing purposes in this case are for commercial development. They have also left it very future possibilities, but for right now, it will be for the commercial development uses. So that is why all eyes of Canada are looking into this process to see how it's worked and if it'll be successful, because there's many First Nations in your footsteps who would like to do the same sort of joint ventures and joint reserves. So it has taken a little longer than usual to create all the documents and conditions because of the unique situation of having this joint reserve. So said, the reason that we have to hold a designation to designate the land for leasing is because members who are not people or third parties, and a business is a third party, and even business owned by Ebb and Flow and Pine Creek, or singly owned by one First Nation or the other, are not considered members. They're considered third parties. So non-band members and third parties are not allowed to operate businesses on a reserve without from Canada as the legal title holder of the reserve land. And the way that we would give them permission to do this is by giving them a lease that sets out all the terms and conditions and rent and environmental requirements that they need. But lease to a business, that land has to be available for leasing. And the way that land becomes available for leasing is through a designation. And a designation can be thought of almost akin to zoning in a city where we're allowed to put in commercial businesses, where parks. Land can be designated for multiple reasons. In this case, it's being designated for commercial development. But before the land can be designated for leasing, we have to ask the members of the reserve would belong for their consent to lease that land. Canada cannot lease the land or designate the land without the consent of the people. And the way you give your consent is by voting in a designation referendum. So we have to go through this process, and the community is waiting to begin development of their businesses because they're waiting for this process to be completed. The designation that we have negotiated extensively with the councils of both Ebb and Flow and Pine Creek, and with the assistance of their legal counsel and their consultant and our working group, Brenda and Darcy, were very instrumental in getting that done, is also unique. It is one of the first ones in Canada that will not have an end date. Normally designations ended 99 years, 75 years, 100 years. This one is for so long as required, unless it ends by an act of law to councils in question. They can ask for the designation on the land to be revoked, but only as long as it remains unleased. Once the land has a lease in place, you have to wait until the lease is either extinguished or ends before then you could revoke the designation. So this is, Manitoba has not had a lease that lasts forever. This is a first for us. So it took a little bit of work for the designation because we have to do what is called future-proofing the document. We have to think far and ahead, 50 years from now, 75 years from now, 150 years from now, when no one in this room is here anymore, what might happen and how can we cover anything that might happen in the future? Because this designation document is a document that Canada will, time something happens on the land, what does the designation document say? It has laid out the terms and conditions that both Pine Creek and Ebb and Flow gave to Canada on how to lease and manage this land. Canada has to follow these instructions. They have to follow this designation. So we have to make sure that it can cover as many possibilities that might arise in the future. So those are all laid out in the designation document. We have terms that, it has all the terms and conditions we have to follow when issuing a lease to leases, unlike the designation, have to have an end date. The two First Nations have said 99 years. The maximum amount of a lease that can happen for this under this designation is 99 years. They can be less, but they cannot be more. They must end. It also sets out how calculated, how much rent can be calculated, how that will be determined, how it gets divided between the two First Nations, which is a 50-50 division between the two. Once we've laid out all the general conditions to any third party, we've also put in specific conditions. For Right now, if the people agree to this designation, we will be leasing the land to the PCEF Ventures Limited, which is a percent beneficially owned by the two First Nations. We'll be leasing it for 99 years, and we'll be leasing it for a nominal fee of $10. The reason that we are leasing it for a nominal fee is so that if it makes money, makes profit, it's operating on the reserve, doesn't need to pay rent to Canada, who would then take that rent and split it 50-50 and put 50% of that rent back to Pine Creek and 50% back in ebb and flow. Canada would collect tax on that rent. So this way we avoid the tax and we don't have to have the First Nations pay rent to Canada that we turn around and pay rent back to them. The lease has not been yet, but should the designation vote be successful, the designation sets out that the people have authorized Canada to then enter into a lease with the partnership company along the terms that are set out in the designation. Our next step that would begin after that. The company itself is Canada won't get involved in any running the company, how the bylaws are set up, how the boards are chosen. That is completely up to the two First Nations on how they have incorporated that partnership and how they set their bylaws. Canada will treat the corporation that we're renting to as if they were any other third party. Walmart, Costco, they're not First Nation, we're renting to their company that's owned. Then once, once the lease is signed and successful, then development will begin on the land. Now, it is very important that we have who would like to participate in voting coming out and doing so. As Gabe alluded in his discussion, we will also need for our designation vote a simple majority of 50% plus one. So if 100 people show up again, if 50 yes, then the vote will pass. However, if we need both First Nations to vote yes for the designation to go ahead, we need both for them to vote yes for the joint reserve to be created. If either one votes no, then we'll have to have discussions back and forth about what you would like to do in the future. When we go, there's going to be some further information sessions going to be held in Pine Creek and Evanville. These will be information sessions that must be held under the Indian referendum regulations. There will be one in June 13th in Pine Creek, June 14th in Evanville, and then one again back on June 15th here in the Victoria again. And the dates are July 10th in Pine Creek, July 11th in Evanville. And as something different, on July 12th, we will be counting all the ballots for both votes in the Dauphin Friendship Center, because we don't want the results of the first vote to in any way influence the results of the second vote, because they can't take place at the same time on the same day. We won't be counting any of the ballots until both votes have concluded in Pine Creek and Evanville. Welcome anyone who wishes to view the opening of the ballot boxes and the counting of the ballots to come to the Friendship Center and view and watch. All of the addresses and times are available in the information document out to our mail-in ballot voters and will be available on the social media sites. My email address will be there, my phone number will be there. Anyone who has any questions, anyone who wants to request copies of the information, has questions on any of the information they've read, is welcome to email me, phone me at any time. That is my role here. I am here to facilitate the vote and make sure that all of the voters that have informed consent and are fully aware of what they're voting on and answer any questions that they might have. I think that is everything I have to discuss. We do have a few copies of the documents available today that I am happy to hand out if anyone would like. And we're here to discuss any questions. If people want to come up and ask us questions before they leave, we'll be here until after supper. And then
We do have a microphone just over onto the right here. If anybody has any questions to ask to our Indigenous Services representatives, that now would be a good time to do that. I also did want to point out, I know Tanya mentioned that it's a simple majority vote for both the addition to reserve and the designation. But I would like to stress that we get as many of our members to come out and vote from both communities, because I know in previous working group discussions, it was stressed by one of the more senior managers that if there wasn't enough representative from either of the communities, that a member from either, if that community could contest the referendum. Just like for an example, if we only had, there's 4,000 members and only 50 vote, somebody could contest and say that we didn't give enough information, allow them that opportunity to vote. So if anybody is here or anybody is watching on the live stream, I encourage you to spread that word that this is a good opportunity for our communities and to make that effort to vote, either in person or by requesting a mail-in ballot.
What's the number then? What's the safe number before anybody can contest it?
Well, what I heard at one of the working group meetings was 20%. They would have liked to have 20% of the population. So if there was 400 people, it's not saying that it won't pass, but then it gives that assurance that we've given enough information to the membership. We probably, I shouldn't say we wouldn't get it, but
yeah, it would still, if we only had a few people come, we would still put it forth. It leaves it open to challenge. Maybe somebody will challenge it. Maybe they will not. Maybe the challenge would win. Maybe it would not. But as many come as possible, it just makes things run smoother.
Question,
Yes.
we threw a number of, like, say, 4,000 members, right, in the community. But out of the 4,000, you may have, so you would go based on that 2,000 numbers.
Yes, you are correct. I do believe it's about, each First Nation has about between 2,000 and 2,500 eligible voters, which in this case, eligible voters are 18 years of age or older on the day of your referendum vote. So July 10th for Pine Creek members and July 11th for Ebb and Flow members. When we post the documents, the voters list, a copy of the voters list will be available in First Nation. You are welcome to look for your name. You're welcome to contact me, who has the master copy of the voters list, to check to see if your name is on the voters list. If it is not, for some reason, we will add your name to the voters list. We'll work with our registration and our deputy officers to make sure that your name is added to the list. We encourage everyone to make sure that they check the voters list. If you're unable to do so and you come to the vote and you find on the day of the vote your name is not on the voters list, that's all right. We have a process for adding your name to the list, even on vote day. So we want to encourage everybody to come out. Don't think, well, I can't go because I might not be on the list. Come anyway, and if you can be added to the voters list, we'll make sure you are. We do everything in our power to make sure that everybody who is eligible community to cast a ballot, either in person or by using the mail-in ballot process. Sometimes some members who are just turning 18 or who are transferring from one band to another sometimes accidentally left off the voters list by people, and people make mistakes. But we will do whatever we can do to correct it and give anyone the opportunity to cast their ballots.
And I know it was asked yesterday, I know some youth just turning 18 don't have their ID yet, so they could still come. Deputy electoral officers are the registry clerks from each community, so they can verify the individual.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Question, now in the designation process, you mentioned there's an economic entity created by Evan Cole and Pine Creek. So would it be that entity would then oversee future leases going forward?
Yes, you are correct. We would lease, when we're leasing to the Pine Creek and Ebb and Flow Management Limited Company, we do what is called a head lease. We head lease the entire site to this company. They are then responsible for subleases. So if in the future, I know their plans are to develop a gas station and perhaps have or restaurant space available, they would be responsible for finding a tenant and negotiating all the terms and conditions of that sublease. All rents for the sublease are instantly split between the two First Nations, laid out in the designation document. Canada would not have any influence or interference in any subleases between the tenant and the headless, unless, of course, a First Nation had put that in their designation document, which these two First Nations be head leased to their company. Canada steps back and only monitors the head lease, while subleases get regulated by the head lessee.
Good, George?
Yeah, the answer there, because yesterday in your presentation, you said, once the government, once you make that decision, use that land, Pine Creek, and Evan Cove, you said if there's any other leases or some leases, you said you'd have to go back to the government. That's what your presentation last night I watched one video.
That was a misspeak.
You just clarified it here.
Yes.
Regarding the funding, that's going to be generated by the service station. How is the funding going to be divided among the First Nations? Is it by population? Or is it 50-50?
It'll be 50-50 by what it makes.
And where does the funding go to the First Nations? What is it used for?
The way it's going to work is, what was explained is there's the PCEF property management, which is made up of the 2 chiefs and 4 councillors, and they'll sign the head lease with the government of Canada. And then the head lease, PCEF property management, will sublease to any business development, which we have started, which is the PCEF Ventures Limited. We will be the ones that will be the businesses, and any profits we make will go to PCEF property management, which is made up of the 2. And then from there, they would decide how much that they would pay a dividend to the communities, but it would have to be equal amounts.
Like a cooperative thing. You'll we're gonna share.
Depending on what further business ventures that they have planned, they might not be paying like 100% their net profits, but they might be holding some back and maybe paying out 50% of that, but that 50% would be paid out equally to each community.
Every family member get a share of this funding.
Yeah.
Like I had it already $5 a year. Because we've had these agreements regarding gaming. And we never ever see any First Nation people, never ever see any of that funding trickle down to the people. So, like clarification for where it's going. You're making $1 million a year, 500,000. First Nation.
And those are those are agreements that need to be further developed. I guess as we go through this first step of creating our reserve and then doing our sublease and creating our business development, we still have to go ahead and still create how we're going to do that business plan of how we're going, our future developments are going to be. I don't think it would be wise of us to pay out profit immediately if we were going to do future business development, especially in what Chief DeJolly was saying in those the potential partnerships with the extra lands that each community owns. But I'm going to be very transparent on how all of that's going to take place in the future.
So that information will be available.
It will, yeah.
Yeah, and just to clarify, yeah, Canada would not have anything to do with how that would be negotiated. That's completely between nations. We don't oversee how their dividends would be split up between the sublessee. We would only be concerned with the HAD lease, and in this case, the $10, the nominal fee rent, because the reason we go with nominal fee for 100% beneficially owned businesses is because we want any profits to be reinvested back into the companies, and then hopefully more business, more investments, then you can start getting profits. And then whatever those are, get to First Nations.
One more question regarding your bylaws. As the chief stated here in his opening comments, you want the leadership changes every 4 years, some First Nation 2 years. Is these bylaws going to be 99 years? Like,
We did put in the governance.
you have a completely new chief of council. They might want to change his roles to get more money or something like that. So I mean, how is that going to be protected?
I believe in the governance and management. Yes, there will be a change in chief and council, and that change would also go a change in the board of PCEF property management. And I know you explained it, but the order of council, it has to be a minimum of 6. But if they were going to change it to an extreme, that special.
I can touch on that. So with the bylaw application, if a new chief and council were to come in and decide that the joint bylaws put in place perhaps weren't amenable to them anymore, or they wanted to change something, they would need the support of the other First Nation to do so. One First Nation wouldn't be able to pass or revoke a bylaw that affects the joint reserve without the other First Nation mirroring that same act. Laws and bylaws for the joint reserve need to be passed by both First Nations to be applicable on that joint reserve, and would only apply to that joint reserve.
And I believe in it, it specifies that it has to be passed by a quorum of 6 of the 10 board members, and it has to be from each community.
One First Nation wants, sell.
Then it was, that's where the special, right?
Transferring to one First Nation. If one First Nation says, no, we don't want to do business anymore.
I think that's where one of the special orders of council where it would have to be all 10 would be in agreement. All 10 board members.
Yes, that's correct. That would be dealt with under a special governing resolution, in which case all 10 members of the governing council would need to agree. Go back to that First Nation that wishes to opt out to fully surrender. And in that case, you would need a supermajority vote. So more than 50% of all 50% of all First Nation members would need to agree to that.
What about the designation that's produced by the government?
The designation would be, no, the designation would be made in place for the one First Nation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
In regards to this designation, likely future economic opportunities, that it may not always be ebb and flow in Pine Creek wanting to do something. Let's just say in Pine Creek's case, in the future, they build, as an example, let's say they build a McDonald's. The profits they're sharing with ebb and flow is just the profit, the cost of the lease, not the profits from the business, because let's say ebb and flow had nothing to do with that venture. Is that correct?
Yes, it would be the same as if a band member, if they built a strip mall and a band member, I would like to operate a business here, may I lease a spot in your mall? Then the profit they're talking about for the joint venture would be the rent from that sublease, and all the money that member's business made would of course go to the member because it is their business. Yes.
Going back to the gentleman that talked about surrender of land. One First Nation opted out if it was passed, so they gave up their 50%.
That is one of the things that I think Gabe is going to have to answer for us.
If one First Nation from the Joint Reserve decides that they would like to opt out, and that process is successful both by the special and the absolute surrender of that land by that First Nation, then the Joint Reserve status would pass to single reserve for the remaining First Nation.
They'll have, I guess, access to the full 100% of that parcel land.
Yes.
Yes.
And just to reiterate, absolute surrenders said they need what's called a double majority or an absolute majority. It means 50% of all eligible voters must vote. So if you have 2,000 eligible voters, 1,000 have to show up. And of that 1,000, one have to vote. So they do take quite a bit to pass.
So, since it's a joint venture, membership, the other reserve, to make up that 50%?
No, it would have to be the one First
But they're a
Nation.
joint venture, that's what I'm saying, but they're
Correctly.
going in as a team, so not everyone's gonna come out to vote, and that's just the way the things go, and but on a venture, how come they're not allowed to vote to get, to make up that 50% with both sides of the First Nations?
Because this is going to remain reserve land and it's owned by the members, ebb and flow that might want to give it up. They have to agree to give up their rights. Pine Creek members can't vote to give up the rights on behalf of the ebb and flow members. They'd have to vote on their own to give up their right to Pine Creek.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah.
making a point of, as a joint venture, both reserves, the population on both sides, because of the, not everyone coming to vote, but can they, because it's a joint venture, can't that vote count together as the 50%?
No, it would have to be the 50%. If you don't get a majority of people show up, then it goes to a second vote, and that second vote becomes a simple majority, which I've only seen one majority vote pass the first time round. And it passed by the exact 951. It's the only time I've seen it happen. Most times it has to go to 2 votes, because you're right. The people you just don't get the numbers. You're correct. But that is probably a very, very remote possibility that would ever have to happen. Are there any other questions?
Okay, if there's no more questions, I think we'll take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back after that and have our presentation from our business development. Yeah, yeah. His presentation is going to be up. Oh, it is up there already.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Hey. Yeah. Why not? Yeah. Yeah. No. No.
Hello, hello.
Is it a fire? Oh. Oh. Justin took off. I know.
I know. I think it's just.
Oh. Pine Creek? Pine Creek? Oh, you mean here now? Street to Pine Creek. Street to Pine Creek. But he used to work for he owns a gas station. Sacramento gas station. He worked there, but now he works for Federal gas station. Yeah, we asked him to come on and help us, like before we contracted him. But he just started with them, so he didn't really want to. And then yeah, and so yeah, it's weird. But I think okay, Justin, tell us whenever you're ready to go. Oh, we're on? Okay. Okay, so I guess the last part of our agenda here is our business development, and we're going to be having ODK presenting what they've accomplished so far.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Rick Laviolette. I'm with ODK Engineering, and I'd just like to express beforehand that ODK is very and grateful to Ebb and Flow and Pine Creek for allowing us to be a part of this very important project. What I brought today is just a very short slideshow regarding what we could be on the development of the land. This is a very preliminary development plan, and we're going to move forward to further design development. And as more details come out, I'll be more than happy to share with the groups in future presentations. Anyway, as you can see on the screen, the establishment is going to be Anishinabe Gas Station. It is at Pine Creek and Ebb and Flow joint venture. I'll go to the next slide. Now, a lot of this is going to sound like I'm repeating some of the things that were spoken before. This started out along was to establish the reserve. You may see a picture there of the reserve land that's being created, the Anishinabe Reserve. And the vision was always to have at least a full service gas station, a convenience store, and other commercial enterprises. So from that vision, that started with Indigenous services to create the reserve land and get things ready for a state of development. So I'll go to the next slide. And again, a lot of this was spoken about by Indigenous services and others here at this presentation. We started with a 5-acre and a location plan here of whereabouts that 5-acre lot is and the approximate boundary for that 5-acre lot. There is a much more extensive land that is owned by the First Nations to the west of this, but right now we're focused on these 5 acres. I'll go to the next slide now. And as again was mentioned, the joint ventures that were created or are being created, it starts with PCEF Property Management. This is a 50% owned partnership owned by Pine Creek, 50% by Ebb and Flow. And it is this group, the PCEF, that will hold the head lease with the federal government for the nominal fee of $10, I believe it was. Much more detailed than I can share with you today. It's a very complex process. So from that, this property management company of the 5 acres with respect to the federal government. Beneath that will be another joint venture, and I'll go to the next slide, which will be called PCEF Ventures Limited. This company will again be shared between Ebb and Flow and Pine Creek. They will be the company that develops the land. They will sublease the land from PCEF Property Management Limited, and then they will be instrumental in the development and leasing of different portions of for different commercial ventures. They will develop the property. They will lease space to commercial ventures. And I just gave a list of a few of the commercial ventures that can be considered, including of course, the Petro-Canada gas station, a convenience store, a drive-through coffee shop, and other businesses that may present by the PCF Ventures Limited. So that's the intent. You'll have the two corporations, the one that handles the head lease, I believe it's called, with the federal government, and then the PCF Ventures will develop the land through sublease arrangement, the property management company. Now, I'm going to get to some pictures. I'll go to the next slide here, just to give you an idea of what we're looking to develop here. We're working with Petro-Canada right now. My colleague with Petro-Canada wished to be here with us today, so I'm just going to speak very vaguely on his behalf with some of the ideas that he's given us here. Of course, it's going to be a Petro-Canada identity on this land. You'll have a big sign on the entrance, so you'll see the Petro-Canada as you would any normal gas station with headers for lease there. You're going to have a full service gas station there. What's unique about this is going to be an electric vehicle charging station and will be incorporated into this project. It's my understanding that Petro-Canada was at first resistant to provide charging station because it's something that they haven't normally done. But councils from Ebb and Flow and from Pine Creek were able to convince them that this is a great idea and that we are a group of people that are looking to really look to the. So they convinced them that electric vehicle charging station is a must. So we are going with that direction. And then just a profile of what the pump stations look like. Now that's with respect to the Petro-Canada gas station itself. I'll show you the next slide here that shows you ideas of what could be attached to the gas station itself. There's no way that this is being suggested as what's going to happen. These are just ideas that are thrown out there. A Tim Hortons, an A&W. Yes, we know there's an A&W right close by. There's a Tim Hortons right close by. tossed around was that maybe it's time for Dauphin to get a Starbucks. Now, the thing about Starbucks is it's not a franchise opportunity. You have to enter into management agreements with Starbucks. But still, that's something that's definitely should be looked at. Include just a basic site plan of what the convenience store and gas bar and a coffee shop, for example, would look like, with a drive-through service and basic layout. I'll move next to the site plan, and I've got a few things to talk about this. I mistakenly, I did a presentation on this yesterday, and I mistakenly thought that there was going to be a service road on the south side of the property that would lead into an area for future development. That's the space to the west property. It has now come to my attention that it's actually on the north side. And the reason we're doing that on the north side is because the city of Dauphin is looking at putting a new controlled lighted intersection there. So it makes absolute sense. If they're going to do it on the north side, we will have our road on the north side of the property. Another thing that was brought to my attention is that a small portion of this reserve land was negotiated with City of Dauphin and sold to the City of Dauphin for managed.
Province of Manitoba.
I'm sorry, it's not the city, it's the Manitoba Highways that purchased this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what they're going to do is they're going to develop a service road that will jut into where the reserve boundary is or was, and they will, and so that has to be brought in. Again, these are very preliminary drawings. Next presentation, which I believe is going to be less than a month from now, will show all of these upgrades on here, and I'll be happy to share those details as they come available. Pardon me. Okay, from there, I'm going to go into just some of the tasks that have and yet. So, as was mentioned, there's environmental site assessment. So there was a phase one, what is called a phase one environmental site assessment completed in a draft state. There's a couple of issues that they're still have to complete, but it looks good that this will get a clean bill of health and there is no contaminations and no reason not to forward this as transfer this to reserve lands. Now, having said that, as we are now entering into the development stage, there are potentially two environmental assessments that need to be done considering the development. The first one is called a project screening assessment, and that's where we give Environment Canada a project description form that describes how we're going to develop this land and what potential impacts that could pose on the environment in the area. That's called a simple project screening report. That's standard. Another thing that may have to be done, this is something that's been on the books for ISC for quite some time, but just say within the last year or so, and with climate change being a big thing and a reality in effect, that we may have to do a climate change resilience assessment. It is quite an involved process, and we have to determine I've spoken to my ISC colleagues here today, and they're bringing it to our environmental department to determine whether a CCRA, a climate change resiliency assessment, needs to be done. We're hoping it doesn't have to be done, involved process, and routinely, because this building is less than 10,000 square feet, typically you don't need to do one. It applies to major projects, a 20, 30, $40 million school, water treatment plants that are in excess of 10,000 square feet. Well, so far we're kind of falling under them. So we're hoping that the decision by ISC Environment will be to forego the CCRA process. If they do, it's something, it involves a lot of community consultation, a lot of research, and that could take 8 weeks or so. So we're hoping we don't have to go that route. That doesn't stop us from developing, but if we do have to do it, it may stall the commissioning. So we're looking forward to hearing from ISC Environment. I understand that they're preliminarily aware, and we're going to find out soon whether that is a requirement. So that's a site assessment. Hopefully I spoke appropriately to that. Then there's the topographic survey. So we have started doing some site investigations, ODK on the base topographic survey, which allows us to create our base plans and do preliminary concepts to get things going. Geotechnical investigations. We have done the field investigations. We've done the lab testing. We've done this through a sub, and when I last spoke to the sub-consultant 2 days ago, they said they would have my draft report for Friday, which is 2 days from now. So I'm looking forward to giving you more, although the preliminary results I have seen show that it is very suitable for development. And we're looking on the types of foundations that we could use based on the in-situ soil conditions. And we're looking forward to recommendations on the grades, the subgrades, and pavements that we would apply to the in-situ soils that are in place. Of course, there'll be continued coordination with Petro-Canada to finalize the concept, to make sure that we get their criteria in place. And so now that we have an agreement signed with Petro-Canada, we're looking for in-depth consultation and involvement with Petro-Canada directly. We need to coordinate with the City of Dauphin on infrastructure tie-in. So the sewer and water services will be tied into the city system. So I will be working with the City of Dauphin where it is met. And also getting back to that portion of land that was given to Department of Highways, we need to make sure that they're coordinated as well, so that we've got the lighted intersection in place and the service roads. Yeah, as I said, the City of Dauphin and Manitoba Infrastructure and Transportation for crossing permits, and also a clarification on right-of-way limits, and make sure that we develop within our acceptable limit. Then there's a business plan, because a project like this will require financing and will need to be reviewed by funding authorities. So a process is in place right now by a separate consultant to do a business plan, and my understanding is that should be done in the next 2 or 3 weeks. They will need input from engineering on the intended development and preliminary costs to go with that business plan, so that they can adequately prepare the plan for review by all of the funding sources. On their property development task force, we need to conduct an RFP for a fuel station general contractor. This would be a contractor that would be providing the fuel storage tanks, all of the fit-ups, all of the piping, all of the pumps that would be required to put the gas station into proper use. So we are right now working on that terms of reference, and we need to get the RFP out, because there's delays in getting equipment and that. So we need to get ahead of finalizing design. This process could take many months, 4 months, 8 months. I'm not quite sure yet, but there's a lot of lead time required to order this equipment. So we've got to get that going before we're finished the site development itself. As we have that ordered, and then building design, now we have a list of spaces that we need to develop, a list of clients that have and their special needs. That's being put into place. We will be doing the final site design based on the geotechnical reports, etc. We will be doing that. Once we get to that, then we will coordinate for the fuel storage and pumping equipment installation, which can be done separate than the site development and the actual building development itself. Although I do anticipate that they will happen concurrent and perhaps even by the same contractor. But we've set it up that there is a potential to have two general contractors there. One of the benefits I see to that is that you've got the fuel equipment specialists, they're doing their thing. But you also have a general contractor, which is more doing straightforward stuff like the site building, the buildings themselves, which would open things up for much more local resources, employment, materials, services for contractors that are working there. So we feel that it's best to do this in two separate contracts. All possible that the fuel contractor could take on both projects. We will see as we go along. Any questions so far? Feel free to just jump up and ask me anytime. I've got one more slide. I want to talk a little bit about schedule. So I'll advance. Okay, we're looking for 66 design for late June. So we've got a month and a half to get to 66%. We are now approaching 33%. We're not quite there yet. I'm hoping to be at 33% in the next couple of weeks. Certainly before our next presentations, which would be mid-June is what I'm understanding. Well, next time we do presentations such as this. So 66% design. Let me tell you a little bit about costing. We also have to cost this out. At 33%, we determine a Class C estimate. Class C estimate is plus or minus 25% cost. So we'll get that at 33% once we know exactly what it is, what the concept is, and what we were building here. As we get to 66%, that's when we go to a Class B estimate. Class B estimate is plus minus 15%. So we're hoping to achieve that. Then we get to 99%. That's when the tender documents are basically ready, and then we can do a detailed analysis, quantity takeoffs, and that would be called a Class A estimate, which is generally speaking about plus minus 5%. Once the tender documents are ready, then it goes to tender. And ultimately, it's the contractors that tell us what the price is. And hopefully, in our astute assessment of all of this, that we will be close and there won't be any surprises when we go from Class A to actual tendered costs. Back to the schedule. We need to issue an RFQ for petroleum equipment suppliers by May 31st. So I'm feverishly working on these terms of reference with my colleague from Petro-Canada so that we can get this out. I currently have 5 firms on an invitation list, all of which have experience in dealing with gas station type products. And with my understanding, they have very good experience with the clients. So it will be an invitation up there, as opposed to going, if we went to a full public, you'll get everybody and their mom that wants to submit a quote, right? But we're going to go for that know what they're doing. City of Dauphin, Manitoba Highways, Manitoba Hydrate permit processes. We're looking to have this all completed, and this includes the environment, by the way, ISC environment. We're looking to have all of this completed by August of 23. I'm allowing 90 days for this process to take place. We're looking to go to tender for general contractor in August of 2023. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And then we're looking to do an official site ground in 23. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that we will probably proceed with the building itself and the site development. We'll get that started in September. Because if we're going to pour concrete for a foundation, we typically, our rule of thumb is that once the temperature hits a consistent minus 5 degrees Celsius through the day and through the days, stop pouring concrete. Do not pour any more concrete because it does not cure properly and will not service as well. So the idea is to do a groundbreaking and get the foundation foundations built. Once we get it to freeze up, then we can do framing. We can, as long as the concrete and the footings are in good position. Meanwhile, we might be still playing the waiting game for underground storage tanks and other equipment as it comes in, but at least we'll get started on this. We're looking at having a finished product ready for opening by 2024. I think we discussed late summer of 2024. So that is the goals, and that is the end of my short presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have at this time.
Now, I have a question, and you just actually just sort of referred to it there at the end about your gas tanks, and you say they're going to be underground or above ground?
Right now, we're looking at underground. I know there is an alternative above ground. I'm not sure about that. I would have to consult with my Petro-Canada colleague on that. But right now, we're looking at underground. And of course, environment might have a say in that too, because there are very strict criteria for fuel storage, et cetera. Yes, sir.
Regarding your underground tanks, what's the lifespan of these tanks in the ground? And is put one up, there's any leakage that First Station would have?
Well, certainly the bonds for the contractor would be, that would be in place. As far as going into more specifics on what the tanks consist of and the longevity, the life of these tanks, to Petro-Canada. I'm sorry he's not with us here today. I wish I could give you more answer, but safe to say that the tanks would be to today's standards that would satisfy any ISC environment concerns, as well as any industrial updates to criteria for tanks.
Would they be responsible if there's some kind of leakage?
Will Petro-Canada be responsible?
Yes, not the First Nation. But that could run.
I would think they, you know what, and I can't speak for them, but I would think they would have to be, because it is at Petro-Canada, and they're responsible for these tanks.
Another question regarding the charging station.
Yes, sir.
Would there be a cost for the electric vehicles to charge their vehicles there?
I would assume so, yes. I don't know what those charge rates are, but like anything, you want to go charge it. I don't know if it would be a meter or if it's based on voltage, but definitely there would be a charge.
And what will be the time limit?
The-
How long will the service station be open? Because everything closes off and it does not 24 hours.
Yeah, I discovered that last night, let me tell you. Yeah. Operations question, but I would certainly encourage the ownership to have an open station 24 hours, because that's something that's sadly lacking. I spent the night in Dauphin there last night, not knowing, and I figured, well, you know what, I need gas, and on leaving there at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I'll just fill up on the way out. I happened to speak to someone, and they said, no, you go fill up tonight because everything is shut down. So that's really another marketing thing for this station, is that this is open 24 hours. Yes, sir.
What George was saying there about the underground tanks, because, yeah, that would be a big concern. I mean, if you don't have to go underground, I think above ground is definitely much safer. Like, the liability is less, right? A lot less. And you just have to look at what happened in Pegasus there itself with underground tanks. Like, normally you would go underground, right, if you're very tight on space, but I think you've got 5 acres there. So.
That's right.
We are looking at developing something in that back half, because I think we're taking up close to 3 acres just on the gas station and the drive-through. So potentially put another business in the back there. And I guess depending, like, I don't know what the criteria is, like how far apart you have to have them from the buildings. So we'd have to find out a lot more about that. It is a shorter turnaround to get those above ground tanks. You can get them in 3 to 4 weeks. Kevin was saying, advising us from Petrocan that we can get them quite quickly.
3 to 4 months, I think, really. And then the other underground storage ones, could be as much as
Eight to 10
months to a
months.
year. So,
You mentioned something earlier about a CCRA,
yes,
and this project, you may have to do that. Now, would someone like, the co-ops, they built the gas stations, do they have to, is the same rules apply to them?
well, this is,
Just because it's-
Federal
it's
regulations.
a federal requirement, yeah.
It doesn't seem fair to me.
And that's an argument to bring to ISC to say, hey, you know what, nobody else around here had to do it, why should we?
Yeah.
But that's political, I'm not political, so.
We'll definitely push it to see that we won't have to get it. Mhm.
Yeah, I've been taking notes of some of these questions and concerns, and I will be taking them back to our environment department and trying to find some more concrete answers. Then when we get them, they can be made available for the public contacting myself or putting it up on the social media. But we are taking down all the questions that we don't have 100% answers to, and trying to we'll be endeavoring to answer them and post the answers where they're available for people.
The next session.
Yeah, scheduled for June 13th, 14th, and 15th. And at that time, it's certainly my hope, and I'm sure ISC, to be able to answer all of these questions that are raised today. And really, that's the purpose of this presentation, is to get that feedback and get questions that we need to answer, so.
Any more questions? Yes, Chief Desjardins.
I guess there's more questions. Maybe if somebody comes up with a question later on.
I, as the electoral officer, will field all of the questions about the joint reserve process and the designation process. But if people have a hard time getting a hold of, I can be the conduit to pass the questions along, so
If I-
people can give them to me.
If I could make a recommendation, any questions or anything should be actually directed to Brenda. And Brenda will distribute those to the appropriate people, be it ODK, be it ISC.
Okay.
And I think it was decided before that Rick and Darcy for ebb and flow would be if any questions were to come up. And I think for each community, we'd be the easiest contact. And we will make sure that we contact either Indigenous Services Canada or ODK, or each community to get the answers that you need. And like Rick was saying, this was our informal information sessions that we're hosting this week and next week in ebb and flow on Tuesday, May 23rd. That live also will be at the community hall in ebb and flow. And again, just to remind everybody that, the next information sessions will be our formal information sessions. And we hope to have more join us at that time. So we'll be having on June the 13th in Pine Creek from 2 to 6 p.m. again. In ebb and flow for June the 14th. And here again in Winnipeg at Victoria Inn on June the 15th. Everybody that's joined us either in person or online, and we'll hope to see you again then. Thank you. We're off. Okay.